Hello, my name is Dennis O'Brien, and I'm a space lawyer. Today I'm going to talk about the Moon Treaty and how it can help humanity return to the Moon in a peaceful and sustainable way. The key is an implementation agreement that supports all private activity while protecting essential public policies. Why do we need this? The answer is in the Outer Space Treaty, often called the Constitution of Space Law. Article 2 of the OST states that outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means. This prohibition was adopted to prevent a repeat of the Age of Imperialism, when countries with advanced technology battled for world domination, causing centuries of war, violence, and neglect. And it worked fine as long as the only space activity was national governments doing science. But people soon realized that there would be other types of activity, some by the private sector. So the Moon Treaty was adopted unanimously by the United Nations and offered for ratification to provide legal support for such activities. But there is a concern about the Moon Treaty, one that has prevented its widespread adoption: the use of the term common heritage of mankind. Article 11 of the Moon Treaty states that the Moon and its natural resources are the common heritage of mankind. Some fear that this means a loss of state sovereignty and freedom of action. But the common heritage of mankind in the Moon Treaty means whatever we want it to mean. We know that because Article 11 tells us that. The Moon and its natural resources are the common heritage of mankind, which finds its expression in the provisions of this agreement, in particular in paragraph 5 of this article. Paragraphs 2 and 3 repeat the prohibition against appropriation, but then conclude by saying that the foregoing provisions are without prejudice to the international regime referred to in paragraph 5 of this article. And what does paragraph 5 say? The states parties to this agreement hereby undertake to establish an international regime, including appropriate procedures, to govern the exploitation of the natural resources of the Moon as such exploitation is about to become feasible. Such exploitation has now become feasible. It is time for us to draft an implementation agreement to make it happen, to close the gap in space law created by the non-appropriation clause while alleviating concerns about the common heritage of mankind. We must give the private sector the certainty and support that it needs if it is going to expand into outer space. For the past 3 years, the Space Treaty Project has worked on such an agreement. After much research and consultation, 4 organizational principles have emerged. Number 1, the legal framework must be comprehensive in scope and support all private activities, not just mining. Number 2, the grand bargain. Trade private property rights for public policy obligations, a trade that is as old as law itself. Number 3, defer issues currently at impasse, such as the monetary sharing of benefits, by creating a governance process for making future decisions, sometimes called adaptive governance. And 4, build upon and integrate current institutions and processes. The proposed model implementation agreement does all of that in 10 paragraphs. The first 3 explain how the private sector obtains priority rights for activities on the Moon, a process we call automatic licensing. If a sovereign state ratifies or accedes to the 5 UN-sponsored space treaties and requires its nationals to abide by the treaties, then any national activity on the Moon that is authorized and supervised by that state shall have priority use of the location of the activity, including the right to use or remove materials in place. It's that easy. There is no need for approval by any supranational authority. But what if more than one party wants to use a particular location? The Moon Treaty already includes a consultation process for addressing any such disputes. Paragraph 9 of the Model Agreement also authorizes the use of voluntary binding arbitration under the Permanent Court of Arbitration Rules for Outer Space Activity, with a convention for international enforcement of any award or ruling. It is the sovereign states who will work out their differences, not an overriding international authority. How does the Model Agreement provide legal support for all private activity? It does so by definition. The Model Agreement states that exploitation of resources shall include, but is not limited to, the extraction of materials, the use of a location for any other commercial activity, such as solar farms and tourism, and the use of a location for non-commercial private activity, such as science and settlements. Expanding the definition of resource to include the location of an activity allows us to create a comprehensive legal framework that will support all private activity on the Moon. So what are the obligations that a party must assume in order to obtain such priority rights? Paragraph 4 enumerates the obligations that are contained in the Moon Treaty. Almost all of them are already in widely accepted treaties and norms. The only one that isn't is the obligation to share the discovery of resources by the private sector. But if a country considers this to be a government taking, they can simply provide a tax credit for the value of the information. It should not be a deal breaker. What about governance for future decision making? Paragraph 8 is straightforward. All substantive decisions must be made by the state's parties. The agreement instructs them to create a governance process for making such decisions. This defers decisions that currently are not able to achieve consensus, such as the monetary sharing of benefits of outer space development. It is not necessary to resolve every issue right now. Indeed, it is impossible. But we must provide the best legal framework that we can at this time in order to get things off the ground. How do we build upon and integrate current institutions and processes? Paragraph 6 requires the state's parties to work with non-governmental entities to establish standards and recommended practices, including the protection of historic landing sites. A prime example is COSPAR, the Committee on Space Research, which has been working on standards for decades. There are also many new organizations that could be folded into the process. The Model Agreement formalizes and empowers such activities. Speaking of sites, what is the controlling law at any given site? In accordance with the OST and the Moon Treaty, the Model Agreement confirms that the controlling law at any location is the law of the state that authorized and supervises the activity of its nationals there. Paragraph 10 also protects the rights of individuals under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the rights of settlements to seek recognition as autonomous or independent states. The rights of individuals and new societies might seem like science fiction, but they are real concerns of present-day people and must be addressed in any international agreement. Otherwise, it will not garner widespread support and it will fail. At this moment in time, it is space law itself that needs capacity building. The current framework is inadequate, resulting in endless arguments over the meaning of outdated treaties. The time has come to craft a new agreement that will facilitate the peaceful and sustainable development of outer space. In the third decade of the 21st century, it is the Moon Treaty, with the proper implementation agreement, that can provide the international framework of laws that humanity needs to become a spacefaring species. For the full model agreement and supporting documents, please go to www.spacetreaty.org. Thank you very much for your time and attention.